I'd like to welcome everyone here to today's presentation on the college experience and managing anxiety. My name is Ed Zamora. I'll be going over the college portion of it as far as the cost, financial aid, and some other aspects to consider throughout the admissions process, mostly for junior and senior students in high school at this point in time. I have with me a colleague, Dave Fugel, who will be going over the second half of the presentation.
Hello, thanks, Ed. I just wanted to share some thoughts about the anxiety and emotional side of the transition from high school into college, which, especially today, is quite powerful and should be something that all parents are aware of.
All right, I'll start off the presentation and then David's going to take over halfway. Today we're going to go over a bunch of different aspects, a bunch of different scenarios, things you should be looking out for, things you should be considering, obviously with everything happening in the world. At the end of the presentation, both David and I will provide you with our contact information if you need additional assistance, our phone number, email, etc. Now, if you have any questions, please reach out to us. We are being inundated, unfortunately, with everything going on. So the easiest way to get in hold of us, to get information from us, to be able to assist you is either phone call or email. That being said, let's start the presentation. Now, today, one of the biggest issues, especially from the seniors graduating the 2020 academic year, is obviously the cost. Now, for those in junior year and senior year and also below, let's formulate a landscape essentially of what's happening nowadays. Now, the price range that most families are dealing with for the college cost range in anywhere from $30,000 to $85,000 a year. Now, obviously, that's a tremendous difference in costs. So for each family, the cost factor is going to be individually different. Now, when it comes to the financial aid aspects of this, one of the things you have to understand is whatever financial aid package you have received, this is specifically for the senior students starting college next fall. Whatever the numbers you're dealing with on the financial aid end would have given you so far, you have to assume whatever the college cost is, it's going to increase by 3 to 8%. Now, this is why this is so important. If the college you elected, or I guess you and your family have elected, you, i.e. the student, have elected to go to next year, is something that's a little bit out of your price range, but you think you might be able to maneuver it for 1 year, you have to factor in that every year going forward, the cost of that college for you will increase by 3 to 8%. So if the first year is going to be tough, you have to realize if the first year is tough, the second year is going to be tougher, and the third and fourth years are going to be even more difficult. So this is one of the reasons why you have to think about the college cost, not just from the sticker price and what they've given you for financial aid for 1 year, but also over the course of the 4-year time frame. So if you know it's going to be more difficult moving forward for years 2, 3, and 4, you must contact the financial aid office and ask them, as the cost of the colleges go up, if our financial situation stays the same, will your financial aid packages increase? Yes or no? This is a very important question to ask because the last thing you want to do is send the student off to college for 1 year. You can only afford that 1 year. Then the second year comes around, they increase the price, and you can't handle that second increase coming in the second year, and you have to pull the student from the college. That's the worst case scenario. Now, that being said, with everything happening in the world and colleges talking about possibly not being able to open in the fall or doing online courses, more and more students are starting to ask about what's been around technically for about 70 years now, but it's gained a lot more popularity over the last 3 or 4 years, what's known as a gap year. Now, I'm going to introduce you into the gap year information as well as the deferment situation as well. Now, a gap year is traditionally when your student takes a year off before they start college to go out essentially into the world, either to do volunteer work or travel. Some students elect to take a year off to learn a trade. You can also look at it from the perspective of sports. This is a big thing, especially when it comes to baseball players and hockey players. Most of these individuals, in some cases, the hockey players specifically, don't go to college. They take a year or two off, kind of work on their craft, and then go to college. I also see this occasionally on the baseball side with the minor leagues, so on and so forth. Now, the benefit of the gap year is it allows your student to grow. It allows them to mature and figure out, is the place that you're looking to go to maybe a year or two from now the college itself, is it the right fit for you with a year of growth or volunteer or maybe even taking courses at another college to kind of see, is this the path you want to take? The gap year probably going to gain a lot more popularity, specifically with everything going on this year, but it's something you should consider. Now, let's say you've been accepted to a college and you're thinking, I'm not so certain I want to go there in the fall, or I'm a little worried about what's going on, or as a family, we don't want to send our students somewhere where we're going to be paying full freight for online courses. Well, first thing you need to do is contact the admissions office and ask them about their deferment policy. Now, deferment basically is kind of the same thing as a gap year, but it's different in this scenario. Deferment basically means you've been accepted somewhere, so they have a spot for your student to go next year, but you contact them and say, we want to take a semester off and not start in the fall, but start in the spring. So your spot's still there, and typically your financial aid is also locked in for the spring semester. Deferment can be done for an entire year. So you can say to the school, we don't feel comfortable because of whatever reason it may be, financial, health issues, the environment everyone else finds themselves in the world, etc. We want to take a year of deferment. Now, you want to make sure to do the right paperwork, talk to admissions. That way they hold your spot. Some schools will not hold your spot for the whole year. You want to make sure that that spot is held if your student wants to go back to that college. Or what steps, what forms, what things need to be done if they do take a year off and they want to either reapply or get back in the mix at that college. The second thing you want to make sure is, after you talk to admissions about the deferment, second person you want to talk to is the people in the financial aid office to make sure your financial aid, i.e. your scholarships, your grants, your free money that you don't have to pay towards the cost of college, will also be there for you when you decide to go back to the school. Some schools will actually elect to change your financial aid based on if your student starts at the school when they're accepted, or if they take a deferment semester or deferment year. As you can see from the bottom of our slide, we have two great websites you can utilize to find opportunities for your students to either do volunteer programs, or also what to think about or what to look to do between these two articles if your student does take a gap year, the things to consider within that mix. Now, that being said, let's talk about student debt. And one of the main reasons we talk about this is because many students go out there, many families start the process of student loan debt and figure out, according to research, that most of the numbers that you see out there indicating that students are leaving school with $25,000, $30,000, $35,000 in student loan debt aren't actual realistic numbers. The reality is most students leave school, at least in the tri-state areas, let's just call it the Northeast, with debts somewhere in the range of $100,000 and above. So the reality is, if you're looking at the student loan debt scenario, what you want to first think about is, what are the options, what's available, and what makes sense for our family? There will be some families where taking on $100,000 in debt, $150,000 in debt, $200,000 in debt is just part of the process, good, bad, or indifferent. Now, I've dealt with families for over 20 years and helping on the financial aid end, both on the loan side, repayment, and refinancing side. So I've seen the whole gambit. For some families, they don't want to take any debt, which is understandable. Other families are okay with taking a certain amount of debt. For me, the key is always based on the student's major. If you know, based on the student's major, based on their projected income numbers, they're making X, and the amount that you're looking to take out, Y, are fairly close to each other, then it's okay. An example would be, your student goes to college X, Y, and Z, and they historically graduate students, and when the students graduate, let's say that school says to you, on average, based on this major, the student makes around $50,000 a year out of school. If your student takes, let's say, $100,000 in debt, it's not such a bad situation. If they aggressively pay down the loan, they could probably pay it off in 3, 4, maybe 5 years. So it's not that big of a deal. On the other hand, if your student's going to college and they're indicating based on their major, they're looking at receiving somewhere between, let's say, $30,000 and $40,000 a year in income, but their debt's going to be around $200,000 in debt, that equation might not make sense. Now, obviously, this is different for every family, but you have to sit down and look at the numbers over a 4-year time frame of the college costs with increases and how much debt we're realistically able to pay down or afford after the student graduates college. Now, for the loan programs, there's 3 different types of loan programs. There's federal loans, state loans, and private loans. When it comes to federal loans, as long as your students have filled out the FAFSA form, starting off freshman year, they'll start off with a $5,500 federal loan in their name. Additional federal loans include the PLUS loan. The PLUS loan is a loan that can be taken out by the parent. It's called the Parent Loan for Undergrad Studies. The PLUS loan has benefits and also has negatives to it. The benefit of the PLUS loan is it allows you to borrow as much as you need for your student's education. It also typically allows you to pay the loan off over a 20-year time frame, so it gives you a pretty extended time frame. There's also a lot of ways that you can kind of maneuver around with deferments and forbearance, just in case you're on a job or there's issues on the medical side. And there's also an asterisk kind of benefit to the federal loan, the PLUS loan, is if anything happens to the parent, if the parent is unable to pay back the loan based on disability or death, the loan is basically, in many cases, forgiven. Now, the negative side of the PLUS loan is nowadays, unfortunately, based on the interest rate environment we find ourselves in, the federal loan, the PLUS specifically, tends to be on the higher rate when it comes to interest rates. The other negative of the PLUS loan on the federal side is it's only in the parent's name, the debt. Which means if the student had told you in the beginning they're going to help you pay, and then later on decide they don't want to help you pay, they don't have to help you pay at all. Now let's talk student loans on the state side. On the state side, almost every single state in the United States has its own student loan program through the states. Now, to be eligible for these state programs, you have to check off one of two boxes. You either A, have to be a student within that state. So if you're going to Ohio State, you can elect to try the Ohio loan. If you look to go to Rutgers, you can do the New Jersey loan, Penn State, Pennsylvania, etc. The other criteria, the checkbox you can indicate there, is if the parents are residents of that state, then you're eligible for the state loans. The state loans typically are in the middle between the federal and private loans as far as interest rates are concerned. They're decent. They're not always the best, but they're a pretty good option to kind of consider. Now, the third option to consider are the private loans. The Sallie Mae's, the Wells Fargo's, et cetera, et cetera. The bank you work with in some cases also have student loan debt available. Based on the environment we find ourselves in nowadays, on the private side, I'm starting to see that most of the private lenders have the best rates available, starting anywhere from mid-3s to the low 4s. So in some cases, on the private loan side, a 4 rate will usually be anywhere between 1 to 4 points lower than the state and federal loan options. Now, the benefit of all these loans are you can refinance at the end. Typically, you're going to find the best rates when you refinance. Reason being is that when you refinance, there's no delay in payment. You're not saying to them, I'll pay you back in 6 months or 4 years. The repayment begins immediately. So for the refinancing companies, that's why typically their rates are very low now. Some rates are even below 3%. So best thing to do for the loans are, number one, shop around. But before that, the best thing you can do is sit down with your student, figuring out with them, does the debt make sense financially? And as well as, can they be able to pay this back in a reasonable time frame? Because the federal, state, and private loans will all give you options of repaying back the loans over 20 years. The negative about that is, if you do that, you might end up paying 2 to 3 times what you actually took out in principal. So if you're taking out, let's say, $200,000 in debt, if you do it over a 20-year time frame, depending on the interest rate they give you, you might actually end up paying back over $400,000 in debt. These are the conversations as a family, i.e. a parent, you have to have with your student. Because in 20 years of doing this, I have yet to meet a teenager that really understands what it's like to work and actually make $100,000 or $200,000 to be able to have on the side. Not just you make 200, I mean after the taxes, the mortgage, the insurance, and everything else. All that being said, let's now talk about, for some of the seniors and now for junior parents as well, the academic aspect of this, the admissions portion of this, and how competitive it's actually gotten. As you can see from the chart here, when you start looking at higher level schools, the top tier programs, it does become more and more difficult to be accepted. Now, based on everything that's happening now with the scenario the whole world finds themselves in, the admissions has actually gotten a little bit easier for students for this year's graduating class of 2020. Reason mostly being because of the cost. There's a lot of families out there that are afraid of the cost, either because of job loss or the health situations that are happening out there. So schools are actually seeing less deposits, historically speaking, than they have ever before in the past. Now, that being said, this is probably going to affect this year's graduating class 2020 and the 2021 graduating class, because there will be economic ramifications that are going to be felt for years to come, unfortunately, based on what's happening now between the unemployment and everything else going on in the world. Now, that being said, let's assume that your students apply to college, but they didn't get into their top choice, and they're thinking, you know what, maybe I wasn't good enough, and that's something that's kind of affected your student academically speaking or mentally speaking. Now, over 20 years of doing this, I can guarantee you that in many cases, I would say probably 99% of the time, it doesn't matter where your student goes to school. I know that's something that most families don't want to hear, or the college advisor will reject that concept. But the reality is, it all depends on what your student does when they're in the college. And let me give you an example. Here we have a chart of basically CEOs out there and the colleges they come from. Now, the interesting thing is, of course, you'll see at the top of the list, which is understood, at a Stanford, at a Harvard, Columbia, at UPenn, you're going to see a lot of the Fortune 500 companies coming from, or you would assume, a lot of the Fortune 500 CEOs coming from these institutions. That's obvious, based on their tier and their distinction, so on and so forth. But what most families don't realize is, if you look a little bit further down, of the top 13, most CEOs, based on coming from certain colleges, you're also going to see on there Rutgers and Indiana, which means you don't need to go to the top tier college to end up making a very good career for yourselves. I'm pretty sure many of you, before you even saw this chart, would never assume that Rutgers University has more Fortune 500 CEOs than MIT does. This is why, in many cases, does not matter where your student goes to school. What matters is what they do when they're there. So if they didn't get into their first choice, it's not a big deal. Yes, it sucks. Yes, it affects them emotionally. Yes, it hurts you as a parent because you want your best for your student. But in many cases, you don't need to spend $60,000, $70,000, or $80,000 a year for your student to do well in life, essentially. It all depends on what they do with the time they have and the resources that are provided to them by the college. Now, that being said, let's talk about the upfront honesty and discussing these issues, both financially with your student, as well as sitting down with your spouse, or even just looking over your financial situation, figuring out what does or what does not make sense. Now, based on the age of the parent, considering you're obviously going to be a lot older than your student, what you want to figure out is you want to sit down with them and look at the numbers. As I mentioned before, taking out debt is not a bad thing, as long as you do it in a smart way. You want to sit down and figure out a financial plan for both your student and yourselves as a family unit for that student going off to college. You want to make sure you're utilizing realistic numbers by looking up the student's career path, what they can potentially make. Does it make sense based on the amount of debt you're taking? It's an investment you're making that's going to be requiring a lot of capital. So you want to make sure you're making the right investment. Does this school make sense with this major, with this much debt? Or does it not make sense? You also want to make sure your student feels comfortable at that college. I have in 20 years seen students get into the top colleges and not attend. Believe it or not, there are students that get accepted to Harvard that do not go. Same thing with Columbia, Stanford, all across the board, because in some cases it doesn't fit the student and what they're looking for. Every student is different. And when I'm building a college list with a student or a family, and we're discussing things about where a student wants to go, there's always 3 check boxes that you want to have on that list. Number 1, does the school financially make sense? Not what it costs, but what can we expect from them as far as financial aid and the deductions from that based on grants and scholarships and the amount of loan we may have to take on or the amount we're coming out of pocket for. Does this investment make sense? That's box number 1. Box number 2, Academically, is my student capable of going to this college and doing well, or at least managing the workload? If you know, good, bad, or indifferent, your student may have gotten into a good college, but maybe they're not mature enough to go off to a four-year college, you have to have that discussion. Or if you know that the school, based on the culture of the school, is very, let's say, cutthroat, very competitive, and your student's not that way, this might not be the best college for them. Reason being, I've seen this over 20 years. I've seen students who are the valedictorian of their high school. I've seen students have perfect SAT scores, go off to college, have way too much freedom, good, bad, or indifferent, unfortunately bomb the first year, and then all of a sudden what happens? You've wasted all that money and nothing happened because you can't get college credit for that if you failed every class. I've also seen students who found the right school academically, go in there not knowing what they want to do. Maybe they went in undecided, maybe they kind of coasted through high school to be average, and they just skyrocket because they find what they want to do. They're right in the right college, they're making moves, they're doing things, they're going to class before and after, asking questions because they're engaged. The third thing you want to find, so the financial aspect is one, the academic aspect is two. The third option is the social environment. Now, many families don't consider the social environment, in my view, as much as they should. And what I mean by social environment is not just going there and partying. It's not what I mean. The social environment basically means when you go to the college, whether you do an overnight, you stay there when you're in high school to kind of get a lay of the land scenario, or you do an open house and you kind of walk around and ask questions of the students and what it's like there, the culture, etc. What you're really trying to do, specifically from a student's point of view, is figure out, do you feel comfortable there socially? Such as if you're asking questions of the student tour guide and every answer they give you is something you would never want to do, or something that just is so against your instinct or things that you find fun, this may not be the right college for you. These are the three check boxes you have to have. If the college makes sense financially, academically, and socially, then you have the right list. Now, these are the questions, these are the things you have to talk about with your student. Because whether or not you believe it or not, even if you think they're not listening to you as a parent, they are listening to you. I deal with over 2,000 teenagers a year, over 20 years. And I would say, even the students that you think are not paying attention to their parents, are not listening, are not hearing anything, they are hearing you. You might not think so, but they are. Your goal is to get them into college and out of college in that 4-year time frame with as little amount of debt as possible to allow them to start their life, their career. You are there to guide them. So if you know something doesn't seem right, maybe the wrong school, maybe the wrong major, maybe it doesn't seem like they fit in socially, or this wouldn't be a school that they would like to go to, you have to speak up. Or if it costs too much and you don't think it's worth the investment, you have to speak up. That being said, how do we figure out and start doing some research on our own? Very simple. This website here, collegeboard.org, is probably the best resource families can utilize. On this website here, you can pull up colleges' profiles and learn a wealth of knowledge about the admissions side, the majors they offer. Do they have the campus size we're looking for? How far in distance are we talking about? It provides a wealth of knowledge that parents should be utilizing. In 20 years of doing this, probably the one mistake I see across the board is parents not going to this specific website, collegeboard.org, because it provides everything, all this information for free. You're not paying for anything. On the College Board side, besides the admissions side, you can also link up to, on their profiles of each college, the financial aid aspect. Which financial aid forms are they looking for? How generous is the college? How expensive is the college? Do they offer scholarships based on academics? Do they not offer scholarships based on academics? Are they generous on the grant side, which is also free money I don't have to pay back as a parent? These are great tools to utilize as a parent to not only educate yourself, but to feel more comfortable when your student starts bringing up schools and saying, Mom, Dad, I love this college. This is where I want to go. You can feel more comfortable saying, let's send an application in, because you'll know, can we get in? But you're also going to know, can we afford it? That's why College Board is so helpful. Now, that being said, I'm going to pass on the second half of the presentation on to David here, and he's going to keep going throughout the rest of the presentation here. Once again, if you have questions or concern, we will be providing both my information and David's contact information at the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Ed. And full disclosure, my family was fortunate enough to have found and chosen to have Ed be our guide through this most confusing, emotionally charged journey that we've ever faced. And he made it incredibly simple and calm, and really prepared us very well for that journey. And I'm forever thankful for that, and highly, highly recommend him as a voice of reason, an honest voice, and incredibly well informed. So thank you for that, Ed. I'm a facilitator, coach, and guide. I offer gentle, non-judgmental support and guidance to help my clients through what ultimately turns out to be their most challenging journey in their lives. And over the past 5 years, I've noticed that my practice has shifted as more and more parents of college-age students have reached out to me. Once their children have gotten into college, they've been riddled with anxiety, stress, burnout. And I've seen it time and time again, where they were the happiest kids in the world, and parents just reach out to me because they just wanted to be happy again. So what it is that we're talking about is college app anxiety. And it starts as early as sophomore year, when they get introduced to this process. Stress does induce anxiety. There's tons of literature on it and studies that have been done. And we know a lot about stress and the nature of stress, and how our brains are not prepared for long-term high-level stress. Our brains are ready for high spikes and then lows. Our kids don't get the lulls. It may not seem that difficult or that complex, but in the information age that we're in right now, it is intense, constantly intense. And parents have a significant role. And I think my intention in coming to this conversation is to create an awareness. Just be aware that this is what's going on. And it's under-addressed in the school setting until something horrific happens. And the other reality is, from high school, it does carry over into the college experience. We're hearing horrible statistics of what is going on, and the news is riddled with articles about what is taking place. So we go to the news. For example, the Atlantic High Stress High School. What is the balance between preparing high school students for college and ensuring they aren't killing themselves in the process? One thing I just want to point out to parents: a study was done in perceived stress. And in this study, what was found was that students perceive their stress 30% higher than their parents perceive it. So even if it is what is perceived is real. So if that's what the kids are perceiving, that's what they're experiencing. And as parents, we tend to look to our history, going uphill in the snow, no shoes, back and forth to school for 10 miles. How many miles did you go to school, Ed? What was your walk? About 10 miles?
It was about 10 miles for me, yes.
Uphill both ways?
Both ways, yes. I think it works for everybody.
Right, exactly. So it's our responsibility as parents to make sure that they're living that balance. And even medically, when we look at the medical news, high school students are stressed out about college admission. And the reality is that they either burn out before or right after they're accepted. What is the point of going through this journey if it's not a joyful journey? And that's really what it's all about. So you may ask why? Why is this happening? And why is it happening now? Great question. There are many reasons. One of them is, again, perceived parental pressure. We expect a lot of our kids. We really do. And quote unquote, good kids are expected to do good things. The obvious increase in financial burden, Ed can speak to that in volumes. Yes, this is a lot of the family's investment to put into, and there's an expected return on that investment, as it were. There's an intense competitive environment. It has gotten higher and higher every year. There's, again, going back to the sustained levels of stress, it is chronic and it's constant. And the other challenge is we don't really, I've heard so many students that I've worked with and parents say, why don't we teach these coping strategies, these resilience strategies? Well, we normally don't teach them until it's too late. So let's look at some common stress producers for teens. Failing an exam. Today it's just very challenging to keep up with the rigors, and sometimes due to a lot of different causes, they may fail an exam or some of their papers. They're constantly concerned about at this age, physical appearance. Big challenge, what they're dressing, how they're looking. Judgment and evaluation by others, especially students, can be brutal. We know about bullying, right? But there's a subtle undertone to the judgment that goes on. The future, yes, they are thinking about the future. Very, very much so, especially right now. The future, one of the things that is a tremendous trigger to stress is uncertainty. We crave certainty. So right now, there is a tremendous stress of an uncertain future. Problems with peers, whether it's working together or finding a harmony in the school situation is a big challenge. Of course, boyfriend or problems with boyfriend or girlfriend. From my life's experience, that doesn't go away even after marriage. But they're young and they're under a lot of stress. In addition to that, throwing the boyfriend-girlfriend navigation onto it seems insurmountable. Any situation that threatens self-esteem is a big, big stressor. And of course, disagreements with teachers and parents, counselors, or any adults is a big stressor, and especially at the it's not a fully developed brain at this point. So there's a lot of stress that can be derived from that. So then we go to the self-care component and interventions. And again, this is about you being aware and introducing them to what can be done. I basically went back to this list when I wrote an article for a local university when all of their students were sent home recently. Yes, that is a lot of stress. They go from being free to going back to a situation where they're going to be managed, and they don't really necessarily do well with that. So what can we do in that situation? Movement, mindful movement, breathing, yoga, meditation, tai chi, prayer, affirmations, counting one's blessing, emotional grid work, which is basically intentional, listing values and intentions, is an amazing way to manage stress. And a tool called Emotional Freedom Technique, aka tapping, which has been shown as of late to assist in PTSD, lower cortisol levels, raise our immune system. It's a phenomenal tool, and it happens to be one of my preferred tools that I am an expert in. So those are some of the tools that are interventions in self-care. So let's talk about like mindful movement and breathing, for example. Just go out and walk. Encourage them to hike. Encourage them to go running. Sports are incredibly important. Even if it doesn't feel like they have time for them, they are important because it creates the space. Dancing mindfully with intention, yoga, tai chi, hiking in nature, stretching. Those are incredible because just the breath work sends messages to that fight or flight mechanism, the amygdala, that we're not in danger. We're not in, and it changes the perception of what's around us. Empower. I call them the empowering lists of 10. Just encourage and do this as a family. This is not something to dictate to your kids. You guys pick it up and work with it and have it around the dinner table. What am I most grateful for? Or if I find a hard time answering that, what could I be most grateful for if I chose to be? What are the blessings in my life right now? Even in this age of COVID, we can sit down and pause and answer those questions and feel the difference in your body. It's remarkable. And don't forget, the mind leads the body. There is a mind-body connection. Who am I most thankful for, and who has touched my life? Just journaling that and writing that down is just incredibly powerful. I had mentioned the emotional guidance grid work. I just create a sheet and I write down what it is that I want to feel. What are the things, if I had a GPS system that I could put into my emotional guidance system, what is it, where would I want to guide myself? And these are some of the things that I have gotten actually from high school students and young college students, and they want to feel supported, connected, patient, joyful, accepted, inspired. They want space. They want to be healthy, challenged, encouraged, mentored, understood, nurtured, empowered, and fun and safe. Of course, fun has to be in there, right? And yes, safe. Wow, that's a really big one, especially in today's environment, right? So plugging into those intentions, that's the intention that I use, even in finding a jumping off point. If we feel like there's nothing that we control, this is something that we can absolutely turn to and feel control over. I can at least control my intentions of what I want to plant in terms of seeds of emotions. We also can do affirmations. Using affirmations like, I trust the process of life. Everything is unfolding as it should be. Wow. To say that instead of, I have no idea and I have no control over anything that's going on. What if we did trust? And you know what? If we're not ready to say something, make a statement like this, start it with what if. What if I did trust the process of life and everything was unfolding? Just to create that, put those negative thoughts, those doubts on trial and use it with the what if. What if I did my part and rested and the rest would reveal itself? What if I could release myself and my worries into hands that know best? Wow, wouldn't that be incredibly releasing and have incredible relief? What I will focus on what I can control and release the rest. What an amazing intention, and what a beautiful, freeing thought that would be. So these are all thoughts that are counter to what our negatively biased brain is telling us. 80% of our thoughts every day are negative. That's just the nature of the reptilian brain. 80% are negative. We are the descendants of pessimistic cavemen, because optimistic cavemen got eaten. So this is who we are. This is what we're dealing with. So we want to intentionally introduce thoughts and habits that are more positive and push back against those negative thoughts. Finally, just some family thoughts that I just wanted to mention. That this is a process to be enjoyed by the whole family. I love to think of it, and Ed, I think when we work together, I think you heard that from my family. I want this to be an adventure. This is an adventure for all of us. The search, the financing, meeting you, having the support and finding support of other people along the way is an incredibly, can be an incredibly rewarding adventure and process.
It really is. I mean, having worked with you and having, for those who don't know, myself, I've been in the college admissions financial aid process for over 20 years. I've known David now for going probably close to a decade now. And I must meet at least 2,000 families a year because for those who know who I am, I speak at about 80 to 100 high schools throughout the tri-state area, most of the Northeast, at high schools that bring me in to inform parents about how financial aid works, admissions, the whole gambit. So I would say that between the last 10 years or so of knowing David and helping him and his family on the financial aid end and admission stuff, he's been an amazing resource for me, for the students I see, and also the parents I see that are having a little bit of a difficulty from the anxiety aspect or the stress level, not just of getting admitted to the college, but just life itself. So if you're looking for help to just kind of find some relief, find some assistance here, I know a bunch of my parents have called me and emailed me, thanked me for introducing them to David, because this is a very stressful process, whether you're a junior family starting off the college list and looking to do visits with everything that's happening, the campus is being closed, or not being able to take the SATs or ACTs or getting the scores you don't want. And, you know, the stress level could be overwhelming, not just from the student, but from a parent point of view of wanting to help out and not knowing what you can do. So for me, David's been a wealth of help for many of my families I've helped throughout the whole process, between the tapping, the positive affirmativeness, the whole thing. It's just been a great key aspect. And I thank you, David, for helping my families and the people I've sent to you. So anyone who's watched this presentation, if you need help, whether it be on the admission side, financial aid help with the college stuff, you see my contact information on the screen. If you need help with stress relief or just trying to get some help on the anxiety side of it, I would highly suggest contacting David directly. He is just a great resource to utilize throughout this whole process as well, specifically on that side.
Thank you, Ed, and just thank you for caring enough to include the emotional part of the journey, because I know that you care about the whole family, the whole psyche, the whole part of the process, and I think that's what made our family add you to our personal board of directors when this process happened. That was incredibly beneficial, and I knew that you cared, and I really appreciate how you've taken this on as a personal mission, especially today.
No problem. I appreciate it. But for those who need help, we have our information on the screen. Please reach out to us. I know that David and I both have newsletters that goes out monthly as well. If you want a newsletter to let you know what you should be doing throughout the time frame that you're in at this point in time, please reach out. Please email us. Other than that, I thank you guys for watching our channels here. If you wouldn't mind subscribing and just giving us a like, we do appreciate that. Thank you so much.